A map can hold a secret that rewrites history. This is the world of unexplained maps, ancient charts that show continents and coastlines long before their official discovery. By the end of this journey, you will see 20 of these impossible documents and decide for yourself what they reveal about our past. We will examine parchment that seems to depict Antarctica without its ice, and a medieval sketch of North America drawn decades before Columbus set sail. These artifacts force a single, profound question: how much of our shared story is still waiting to be found? To label a map as anomalous is to acknowledge a quiet defiance of the historical record. It is not simply an old map with a few errors, but a document that contains a precise truth it should not possess. Imagine a medieval monk hunched over vellum by candlelight, carefully inking the outline of a continent that would not be found by European explorers for another 300 years. That is the core of the mystery. These artifacts display coastlines, mountain ranges, or entire landmasses with an accuracy that clashes violently with the accepted timeline of human exploration and geographic knowledge. The study of such maps exists in a fascinating space between established academic disciplines, drawing in historians, archaeologists, and even geologists who can date the landscapes being depicted. As geologist Dr. James Kennett has noted, the history of cartography is not a straight, predictable line, but a story filled with unexpected gaps and startling surprises. Each anomalous map forces a series of difficult but thrilling questions upon us. Could they be evidence of pre-Columbian voyages across vast oceans, journeys lost to all but the sketchbooks of a few? Did ancient cultures develop methods of surveying and charting the world so advanced that the knowledge simply vanished? Or are we, centuries later, misreading the symbolic shorthand or even the fortunate mistakes of an artist who never left his scriptorium? The tension between these possibilities is what gives each map its power. It is with this framework in mind that we approach our first and perhaps most famous example, a chart that seems to show a world not as it was known, but as it truly was, buried under miles of ice. The world map, as it was taught for generations, has a comforting, linear clarity. We can trace a neat progression from the classical understanding of Ptolemy in the 2nd century, his Earth centered on a landlocked Mediterranean Sea, through the slow, courageous expansion of the Age of Discovery. Official records tell us Portuguese caravels meticulously charted the west coast of Africa, that Christopher Columbus made his fateful landfall in the Caribbean in 1492, and that Ferdinand Magellan's expedition first circumnavigated the globe in the early 1500s. Each voyage returned with new coastlines to ink onto parchment, pushing back the edges of the terra incognita, the unknown lands. This is the established timeline, a story of gradual revelation built by named explorers on specific dates. It is a story that makes sense, yet the maps we are about to explore do not fit within its borders. They are chronological anomalies, pieces of a puzzle that seem to belong to a different picture entirely. To feel their full, unsettling impact, you must first hold that accepted timeline in your mind. Only then can you appreciate the profound dissonance of seeing a detailed coastline on a document created decades, or even centuries, before any European ship could have possibly sailed there. This contrast between what was officially known and what was secretly drawn is the heartbeat of our entire investigation. It transforms old pieces of vellum from simple historical artifacts into profound mysteries. With that essential context setting the stage, we begin our countdown with the map that arguably started this entire field of inquiry, a chart so precise in its wrongness that it challenges our understanding of an entire frozen continent. That profound dissonance finds its first and most powerful voice in a piece of parchment drawn in Constantinople in 1513. The surviving fragment of the Piri Reis map shows the Atlantic Ocean with a clarity that would be impressive for any chart of its era. We see the bulging coast of West Africa and the eastern shoreline of South America rendered with a detail that aligns remarkably well with modern geography. Admiral Piri Reis, a seasoned Ottoman navigator, wrote in his own notes that this was not an original survey but a compilation. He claimed to have consulted 20 older source maps, some of which he said dated back to the library of Alexander the Great. This admission is the key that unlocks the map's deeper mystery. Piri Reis was working as a historian, piecing together a world picture from documents that were already ancient in his time. The true shock, however, lies at the very bottom of the parchment. Below the tip of South America, the map shows a curious, ragged landmass. In the 1960s, a professor named Charles Hapgood proposed a theory that sent ripples through the world of historical research. He argued that this southern land was not a misplaced Patagonia or a mythical continent, but a representation of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. More specifically, he suggested it showed the continent's coastline as it would appear without its mile-thick ice cap, a topography hidden from human eyes for thousands of years. If true, this would imply the existence of a pre-glacial, seafaring civilization advanced enough to survey a continent that has been frozen and inaccessible for millennia. The academic response to this idea was, and remains, intensely skeptical. Many scholars see the landmass as a speculative addition, a cartographic guess, or a misplacement of lands rumored to exist in the far south. The debate itself, however, is less important than the fundamental question the map forces us to confront. Where did Piri Reis get his information? His own notes point to a chain of knowledge stretching back into deep antiquity, a library of charts that sailed seas we have forgotten. Whether that lost knowledge included Antarctica or not, the Piri Reis map stands as a permanent testament to the gaps in our story. It is a ghost image of a world that once was, or perhaps a world that was once known. The controversy surrounding the Piri Reis map is one of interpretation, but our next artifact faces an even more fundamental challenge. Is it real at all? A small, unassuming parchment known as the Vinland Map surfaced in the mid-20th century, and it immediately ignited a firestorm that still burns today. Dated to around 1440, it depicts the known world of Europe, Africa, and Asia with the expected medieval distortions. But in the distant northwest Atlantic, across a vast ocean, it shows a large, irregular island labeled in Latin as Vinlanda Insula. The inscription beside it explicitly describes the voyage of Leif Erikson around the year 1000, detailing his discovery of a new land rich with wild grapes. If authentic, this would be a monumental discovery. It would be the very first known map to show any part of the Americas, drawn more than 50 years before Columbus sailed and over 5 centuries before the map itself was found. It would provide stunning cartographic corroboration for the Norse sagas, transforming Viking exploration from epic poetry into documented geography. The initial excitement was immense, for here was a tangible link to a legendary journey. Yet, the map's own history is a shadowy tale of antique dealers and uncertain provenance, a perfect breeding ground for doubt. The central question became not what the map showed, but when it was made. Scientific analysis focused on the ink. Early studies suggested the ink contained anatase, a form of titanium dioxide not commonly used in pigments until the 20th century, pointing strongly to a modern forgery. Later, more nuanced research proposed that medieval inks could sometimes contain trace anatase from natural sources, reopening the possibility of authenticity. The debate is a meticulous technical war fought in laboratories, with each new paper shifting the balance. This back and forth has turned the Vinland map into something far more than a historical document. It is a cultural icon and a philosophical battleground. For those who wish to believe the Norse sagas, the map is a precious validation. For skeptics, it is a clever, lucrative hoax. The map forces a difficult dialogue between the stories we tell about our past and the hard, often ambiguous, evidence we use to support them. It shows us that sometimes the search for truth is not about finding a single answer, but about learning to sit with the weight of the question itself. This tension between art and accuracy takes a different, more beautiful form in our next example, a medieval masterpiece that seems to hold the entire cosmos in its intricate design. While the Vinland map's authenticity is a matter of fierce debate, there is no question about the reality of our next chart. The Cantino Planisphere is a breathtaking work of art and espionage, painted on vellum in 1502. It is a Portuguese world map so valuable, so secret, that it was literally smuggled out of the country by an Italian agent named Alberto Cantino, who delivered it to his patron, the Duke of Ferrara. This was not a public document, but a stolen treasure, a snapshot of the world as Portugal's most skilled cartographers understood it at the very dawn of the 16th century. At first glance, its depiction of the Brazilian coastline is a triumph of timely reporting. Pedro Álvares Cabral had officially claimed this land for Portugal just 2 years earlier, in 1500, and here it already was, rendered with startling fidelity on the other side of the Atlantic. This speed alone speaks to a highly efficient intelligence network, where the logs of captains were rushed to royal chart makers with urgent priority. Yet the map's true mystery lies not on the coast but inland. The Cantino Planisphere shows the interior of South America with a level of detail that should not have been possible for decades. It carefully depicts the massive, branching estuaries of the Amazon River and sketches the broad Rio de la Plata, waterways that European explorers would not properly navigate and chart until the 1530s and 40s. So how did the mapmakers know? The most plausible explanation is also the most fascinating. Portuguese explorers, perhaps during Cabral's brief stop or on other unrecorded voyages, must have engaged in detailed exchanges with indigenous peoples. They would have gathered descriptions, perhaps even seen rough sketches drawn in the sand, of the vast river networks that formed the continent's lifeblood. This information, filtered through the lens of European cartography, was translated onto the vellum. The Cantino Planisphere, therefore, is more than a map. It is a cultural conversation, a document born from whispered knowledge shared between worlds that had only just met. It reveals a hidden layer of early contact, one focused not just on claiming land, but on understanding it. This chart is a physical testament to the cutthroat world of the spice trade, where a single accurate coastline could mean the difference between a kingdom's wealth and its ruin. In this arena, geographical knowledge was a state secret more valuable than fleets of gold, guarded as closely as any fortress. This theme of knowledge that exists just beyond the official record prepares us for an even older puzzle, a medieval chart that seems to contain insights from a source that defies all explanation. The world of stolen charts and whispered secrets gives way to a family legend, a tale of shipwreck and discovery that was published in 1558 but claimed a far older truth. Niccolo Zeno, a Venetian nobleman, produced a map of the North Atlantic that he said was based on the lost letters and charts of his own ancestors, the Zeno brothers. According to his account, these brothers had sailed into the northern seas in the late 1300s, nearly a full century before Columbus. Their adventures, as Niccolo recounted them, were the stuff of epic saga. They were shipwrecked on a mysterious island called Friesland, rescued a prince, and sailed even farther west to lands they called Estatiland and Drogeo. The map Zeno published to illustrate these journeys is a fascinating puzzle. It shows Greenland and Iceland with a recognizable, if distorted, shape. But it also prominently features the large island of Friesland, a place that never existed on any real coastline. And to the west, across an ocean strewn with sea monsters, lie those mysterious lands with strange names. For centuries, the entire narrative was dismissed as an elaborate hoax, a patriotic fabrication by Niccolo Zeno to claim Venetian precedence in exploration. The phantom island of Friesland was the clearest evidence of fiction, yet the dismissal is not entirely comfortable. The depiction of Greenland, while misshapen, shows a surprising awareness of its southern fjords. More intriguing are those western lands. Estetiland, described in the text as a civilized place with its own language and libraries, bears a curious resemblance to parts of the Canadian coastline, perhaps Newfoundland or Labrador. Drogeo, described as a warmer, vast land to the south, echoes later descriptions of the North American mainland. So what are we to make of this? The Zeno map sits in a frustrating middle ground. It is almost certainly not a perfectly accurate record of a 14th century voyage, but it also does not feel like a work of pure imagination spun from whole cloth. The most compelling theory is that it is a layered document, a mixture of genuine, foggy memory and later embellishment. Perhaps the Zeno brothers did sail far into the North Atlantic, encountering Inuit peoples or Norse settlers whose stories of lands farther west were woven into their own reports. These fragments, passed down through the family for generations, were then assembled and inevitably corrupted by Niccolo when he tried to make a coherent map and story from them. The Zeno map thus becomes a metaphor for the entire search through anomalous cartography. It challenges us not to simply choose between truth and lie, but to listen carefully for the faint signal of real experience buried deep within the static of myth, pride, and the passage of time. It is a reminder that every explorer's map is also a story, and every story changes slightly each time it is told. This gradual corruption of knowledge over centuries takes a more dramatic form when we look east, to a series of charts that seem to preserve a world that vanished beneath the waves. The phantom islands of the Zeno map speak to a past obscured by storytelling, but another Ottoman chart from the same era presents a different kind of clarity, one that feels almost uncomfortably modern. In 1559, only a few decades after Piri Reis, another cartographer named Hadji Ahmed produced a world map that remains a profound enigma. His depiction of Europe, Africa, and Asia follows the conventions of his time. It is when you look to the far left side of the parchment that the world seems to tilt on its axis. There, drawn with a startling geometric confidence, is the western coastline of the Americas. The shape of what we call California is not the misshapen blob or ambiguous peninsula seen on other 16th century maps. Instead, it is a recognizably modern outline with a distinctively curved northern coast. Above it, the landmass representing Alaska is shown with a sweeping, accurate arc that European explorers would not properly chart until the late 1700s. The precision is so jarring that some researchers have analyzed the map's underlying structure, proposing that Hadji Ahmed may have employed a sophisticated mathematical projection, a way of flattening the spherical Earth onto parchment that was not formally developed until much later. How was this possible? The cartographer himself provided a cryptic clue. In his notes, Hadji Ahmed stated he had consulted what he called very old Arabic and Spanish maps. This simple claim opens a door to a breathtaking possibility. It suggests the existence of a forgotten pipeline of geographic knowledge, a global network where information flowed not just from west to east with European explorers, but perhaps along the ancient Silk Road, or through the archives of Arab scholars who had preserved fragments of even more ancient maritime surveys. Could the clear shape of California on an Ottoman map in 1559 be a distant echo of a Chinese treasure fleet's voyage, or a memory from a Phoenician trader's logbook, copied and recopied for a millennium before finally finding its way to Hadji Ahmed's desk? The map does not answer these questions, but it insists we ask them. It stands as a stark contrast to the symbolic and often confused geography of its era, a single, clear signal that someone, somewhere, long before the official age of discovery, possessed a remarkably accurate picture of the world's farthest shores. This sudden clarity makes the beautiful confusion of our next map all the more striking, a medieval vision where geography surrenders entirely to faith and symbolism. The startling clarity of Hadji Ahmed's work gives way to a map built not on observation but on elegant theory. In 1737, French geographer Philippe Buache presented a map to the Academy of Sciences in Paris that was, for its time, a work of pure intellectual speculation. He was attempting to solve one of geography's greatest riddles, the question of a great southern continent, a terra australis that scholars had hypothesized must exist to balance the landmasses of the north. What Buache produced, however, was far more specific than a vague, theoretical landmass. His map depicts Antarctica not as a single, solid continent, but as two distinct, large islands, separated by a wide, frozen sea running from a central point all the way to the southern pole. For over a century, this map was viewed as a curious artifact of Enlightenment-era guesswork, an interesting but ultimately incorrect hypothesis that changed dramatically in the mid-20th century. With the advent of sophisticated seismic and radar technology, scientists finally pierced the Antarctic ice sheet, revealing the true shape of the bedrock far below. What they found was astonishing. The continent was not a single, unbroken landmass. Instead, the subglacial topography showed a vast, deep trench dividing East Antarctica from West Antarctica, a configuration that uncannily mirrors Buache's vision of two separate lands divided by a sea. The coincidence is so precise it feels unsettling. Buache himself provided a cryptic explanation for his design. He stated his map was based partly on principles of geographic symmetry, but he also claimed to have consulted what he called very ancient charts. He never produced these source documents, leaving only his word as evidence. This admission hangs in the air, a tantalizing loose thread, so we are left with a profound puzzle. Did Philippe Buache, through a stroke of genius, correctly deduce the hidden structure of a frozen continent using only logic and theory? Or was his elegant symmetry actually a framework laid over fragments of much older knowledge, charts passed down from an era when Antarctica's coasts were not shrouded in ice? The Buache map sits at a perfect crossroads. It is both a triumph of scholarly deduction and a potential relic of inherited secret knowledge. It forces us to consider a timeline that stretches far beyond written history, to an epoch when the world's coastlines looked dramatically different and perhaps were known to someone. This idea of a world mapped in a different age leads us from the icy south to the tropical Atlantic, to an island that appears on charts centuries before any sailor could have placed it there. The line between scholarly theory and secret knowledge grows wonderfully thin in the elegant curves of a heart. Laurent Finet, a brilliant French mathematician of the Renaissance, published his Cordiform world map in 1531. It is a work of art and intellect, projecting the known lands onto a stylized, heart-shaped frame, a symbolic choice reflecting the era's blend of science and humanism. Like his contemporaries, Finet gave cartographic form to the long-held belief in a great southern continent, terra australis, which he drew as a vast landmass capping the bottom of his parchment. This in itself was standard practice, an educated guess to fill the blank spaces. What gives modern researchers pause, however, is the specific shape Finet gave to this theoretical land. Its northern coastline is not a smooth, speculative curve. Instead, it is marked by several deep, distinctive indentations that look less like artistic flourish and more like the estuaries of massive rivers or the mouths of frozen seas. When compared to a modern map of Antarctica, a curious alignment emerges. Two of the largest indentations correspond almost perfectly with the locations of the Ross Sea and the Weddell Sea, the two great gulfs that bite deep into the actual continent. The correlation is rough, certainly not a precise tracing, but it is undeniably suggestive. How could a 16th-century scholar, working from a blend of Ptolemaic geography, Marco Polo's travelogues, and the scattered reports of sailors who had barely crossed the equator, conceive of such specific coastal features on a continent that would not be sighted for another 250 years? Vinland was a synthesizer, a genius at weaving threads of information into a coherent tapestry. It is entirely plausible that his design was a spectacularly lucky intellectual accident, a beautiful coincidence born from applying geometric principles to fragmentary data. Yet the nagging question remains. Could those fragments have included something more tangible, like a weathered chart from a forgotten voyage that recorded real glimpses of a far southern shore? His map captures the very spirit of the age, a moment when the human mind, armed with logic and fueled by curiosity, reached into the unknown and sometimes, against all odds, grasped a sliver of the truth. This Renaissance ambition to map the whole world, seen and unseen, pushes us to look even further back, to an era when mapmakers worked not from theory or stolen reports, but from a direct, intimate knowledge that seems to defy all chronology. The elegant geometry of Renaissance Europe gives way to a panoramic vision from the other side of the world. In the year 1402, at the dawn of the 15th century, Korean cartographers completed a masterpiece known as the Kangnido map. This sprawling work on silk was not the product of a single explorer's voyage, but of an empire's vast intellectual appetite. It synthesized knowledge from Chinese astronomical surveys, Korean maritime records, and sophisticated Islamic geographical texts that had traveled the length of the Silk Road. The result is a pre-Columbian worldview of stunning breadth, a map that places Korea not at the periphery, but confidently at the center of a connected hemisphere. Its depiction of Asia and the Middle East is detailed and expansive, reflecting the overland trade routes of the Mongol Empire that had until recently linked east and west. But the true surprise lies far to the southwest. There, the Kangnido map shows the continent of Africa, and it does not show it as a small, truncated landmass ending in a mysterious southern void, as most European maps of the same era did. Instead, it presents Africa with a broadly triangular shape that narrows convincingly toward the south. The coastline appears to curve eastward, suggesting an awareness that the continent did not go on forever, but had a navigable southern tip. This is the Cape of Good Hope, a geographic fact European sailors would not confirm for another 86 years, when Bartholomew Dyers finally rounded it in 1488. So how did this knowledge appear in a Korean court decades earlier? The map itself is the answer. It is a physical testament to the vibrant, multidirectional flow of information that existed long before Portuguese caravels set sail. Islamic scholars, drawing on centuries of Indian Ocean trade conducted by Arab and Persian merchants, had likely mapped the African coastline with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge, compiled in texts and charts, moved north and east through networks of commerce and scholarship, eventually reaching the hands of Korean mapmakers. The Kangnido map does more than show a continent, it shatters a persistent myth. It challenges the Eurocentric narrative of discovery by revealing that the so-called Age of Discovery was, in many ways, a period of rediscovery from a specific European perspective. Other civilizations were not waiting in geographic ignorance. They were already engaged in a sophisticated, if fragmented, conversation about the shape of the world. This map reminds us that global awareness was not invented in Lisbon or Genoa, but was a mosaic being assembled by many cultures, each holding a few crucial pieces of the puzzle. One of the most tantalizing pieces of that puzzle would be found not on silk, but carved into a humble stone, telling a story of arrival that nobody was supposed to believe. The Kangnido map reveals a world already connected, But our next example shows how knowledge could be lost, only to resurface centuries later with a ghostly echo. In the 2nd century, the Greco-Egyptian scholar Claudius Ptolemy compiled his geography, a work of staggering ambition that sought to map the entire known world using a grid of coordinates. For over 1,000 years, this text was the bedrock of Western cartography, but then it vanished from Europe, preserved only in the libraries of the Islamic world. Its rediscovery in the 15th century was a cultural earthquake, providing Renaissance scholars with a direct link to ancient geographic wisdom. Printers rushed to produce new editions based on Ptolemy's coordinates, but these were not simple copies. They were interpretations where the ancient data was filtered through medieval copyists and updated with the latest, often conflicting, reports from contemporary explorers. One of the most famous, the Ulm edition of 1482, presents Ptolemy's world as he might have known it. Europe, Africa, and Asia are rendered with the distinct distortions of the classical era. But look to the far south beyond the Indian Ocean. There, the mapmakers added a vast, speculative landmass curling around the bottom of the world, labeled simply Terra Incognita, unknown land. This was a standard Renaissance cartographic convention, a placeholder for the great southern continent scholars believed must exist. Yet, the specific contour of this land on some editions is strangely compelling. Its northern coastline is not a smooth, featureless curve. It shows a series of broad bays and promontories that, to a modern eye, bear an uncanny, if rough, resemblance to the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Arnhem Land coast of northern Australia. This resemblance has sparked a profound question. Could these Renaissance interpretations of a 2nd century text be preserving a whisper, a faded memory of the Australian continent, recorded long before Dutch ships made their first documented landfall in the early 1600s? Ptolemy himself was a compiler, not an explorer. He gathered data from Roman merchants, Persian geographers, and possibly even Indian sources. It is within the realm of possibility that his sources included stories from Austronesian sailors, the incredible maritime explorers of Southeast Asia who had been traversing the Pacific and Indian Oceans for millennia. These seafarers almost certainly knew of the great southern land, and fragments of their knowledge could have traveled west along trade routes, eventually finding their way into the ancient libraries Ptolemy consulted. The printed Ptolemaic maps are therefore palimpsests, layered documents where genuine ancient data, medieval transcription errors, and Renaissance speculation are fused into a single image. They challenge us to look past the guesswork and see if, within the lines, we can detect the faint but persistent signal of a truth that was old when Ptolemy was young. This search for signals in the noise leads us to a map that is all signal, a document of such startling specificity that it seems to chart a journey nobody officially made. The search for faint signals within ancient charts leads us to a map that is itself a masterpiece of artistic synthesis. The de Virga world map, created by the Venetian Albertin de Virga between 1411 and 1415, is a radiant circle of vellum that captures a single, fleeting moment in the history of human understanding. It is a beautiful contradiction, a document caught perfectly between two worlds. On one hand, it is a work of medieval artistry, a circular mappa mundi oriented toward the east with Jerusalem near its heart, a design meant to illustrate a spiritual journey as much as a physical one. Yet, look closer. Its depiction of the Mediterranean Sea is not a symbolic squiggle, but a detailed, recognizable coastline drawn with the practical accuracy of a Portolan chart, the kind used by actual sailors to navigate from port to port. This dual nature is the source of both its beauty and its enduring puzzles. De Virga took the emerging, hard-won data from sailors and attempted to fit it into the older, more philosophical framework of the medieval worldview. The result is a map where empirical observation and ancient legend share the same parchment. Nowhere is this tension more visible than in its treatment of the distant East and the far South. The map stretches Asia far beyond the limits known to Ptolemy, culminating in a large, distinctive peninsula that some researchers see as a crude, perhaps even accidentally inverted, depiction of the Indian subcontinent and the island of Sri Lanka. If this interpretation holds, it suggests that detailed knowledge of South Asian geography, likely gathered from Arab traders or overland travelers like Marco Polo, was filtering into European workshops decades before Portuguese ships rounded Africa to reach India. But the greater mystery lies to the south. Below the carefully drawn Horn of Africa, de Virga depicts a substantial landmass. In the context of his time, this was most likely his attempt to give form to the theoretical antipodes, the great southern continent that balanced the world in scholarly theory. Yet its shape is not a generic blob. It has a specific, almost idiosyncratic form with its own bays and capes. We are left to wonder, was this purely an artist's invention, a decorative flourish to fill the empty space at the bottom of his circle? Or could it be, like the possible India to the east, another fragment of whispered travelers' knowledge, a story about a real land far to the south that was being translated into the only cartographic language de Virga knew? The map provides no definitive answer. Instead, it stands as a breathtaking bridge. It is the final, glorious bloom of the symbolic medieval imagination, just as the first sharp, mercantile winds of the Age of Discovery began to blow, promising to replace its elegant guesses with measured facts. In this fragile moment, Albertin de Virga drew not just a map of the world, but a map of the human mind itself, forever suspended between the comfort of the stories it believes and the thrilling, unsettling call of the truth it has yet to find. That fragile moment between legend and fact is captured with startling clarity on a single piece of parchment. In 1424, a Venetian cartographer named Zuane Pizzigano drew a practical portolan chart of the Atlantic, a tool meant for the hands of working sailors. Its coastlines of Europe and Africa are rendered with the confident, crisscrossing room lines that guided navigators from port to port. But in the vast, empty Western Ocean, Pizzigano did something extraordinary. He drew a small archipelago of islands, each with a name. Two stand out, large and impossibly far from any known shore, Antalya and Satanas. These were not new inventions. They were what cartographers call phantom islands, places born from the rich folklore of the sea, whispered among crews in crowded taverns. Antalya was often called the Isle of Seven Cities, a legendary refuge for bishops fleeing the Moorish conquest of Iberia. Satanas, the Isle of Devils, was a place of pure maritime dread where storms and monsters awaited the unwary. On most maps, these were symbolic warnings or hopeful myths tucked into margins. On the Pizzigano chart, they are presented with the same sober navigational authority as the coast of Portugal. This is the map's quiet revolution. It treats legend as geography. The placement of these islands, however, is what transforms them from folklore into a potential historical puzzle. They are positioned in the mid-Atlantic, on a latitude that aligns almost perfectly with the Caribbean archipelago. Their sizes and relative positions have led some researchers to propose a tantalizing theory. Could Antalya be a distorted, enlarged representation of Puerto Rico? Could Satanas correspond to Guadeloupe or another of the Lesser Antilles? If so, the implications are profound. It would suggest that decades before Columbus, European fishermen, likely Portuguese or Basque crews pursuing cod across the North Atlantic, were occasionally blown far off course by violent storms. These unlucky, or perhaps incredibly lucky, sailors may have made landfall on Caribbean shores. Surviving the journey back, their wild tales of lush, unknown islands would have entered the stream of sailors' yarns, losing specific details but retaining a core of truth. A cartographer like Pizzigano, gathering all available reports to make the most complete chart possible, would have included these stories, giving them shape and a place on the grid. The Pizzigano chart, therefore, is a snapshot of a world in transition. It is a moment when the ocean was not yet a confirmed highway, but a realm of terrifying possibility, where every strange log washed ashore and every old sailor's feverish tale had to be considered, evaluated, and sometimes inked onto the map. It represents the very process of discovery, not as a single heroic act, but as a slow, collective gathering of whispers from the edge of the known world, long before the official chroniclers arrived to write the story down. The whispers gathered by cartographers like Pizzigano were about to be forged into a new world picture, one that would literally put a name on a continent. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller published a map and a small set of printed globe gores that would echo through history. He is celebrated rightly for a single, monumental act of naming. Inspired by the travel accounts of Amerigo Vespucci, Waldseemüller labeled the newly charted southern landmass America, a name that would eventually cling to two entire continents. This act alone secures his place in history, but it is not the map's deepest mystery. Look beyond the name to the vast, empty space west of South America. There, Waldseemüller depicted a great ocean wider than the Atlantic, separating the New World from Asia. This is the Pacific Ocean, shown with shocking confidence a full 6 years before Vasco Núñez de Balboa fought his way across the Isthmus of Panama to become the first European to see it, and 13 years before Ferdinand Magellan's battered fleet would become the first to cross its terrifying expanse. So how did Waldseemüller know it was there? He provided a clue in his accompanying text, a book called Cosmographie Introductio. He described the Earth as being divided into 4 parts, with the 4th part being, in his words, an island, inasmuch as it is found to be surrounded on all sides by the sea. This was a logical, even brilliant deduction. By 1507, European explorers had mapped a considerable portion of the eastern coast of the Americas. Simultaneously, the accounts of Marco Polo and other travelers described the eastern extent of Asia. Waldseemüller, a scholar working in a landlocked German town, simply measured the distance between these two known points on the globe. He realized the space between them was too vast to be filled by more land. It had to be water. This was the power of deductive cartography, where a thinker with a good map and a sharp mind could correctly hypothesize a geographic feature no living European had ever seen. His map became a self-fulfilling prophecy. It did not just record the world, it predicted a part of it, planting the idea of a Western Sea in the minds of the very explorers who would later set out to find it. Yet a sliver of doubt remains. Was it truly all deduction? Some researchers note the peculiar, tapered shape Waldseemüller gave to South America's west coast, a shape that somewhat mirrors its actual geography. Could he have had access to fragments of reports from Portuguese sailors, who guarded their discoveries with paranoid secrecy, or even to older charts from Asian sources that hinted at this great water barrier? Whether pure genius or informed speculation, the Waldseemüller map stands as a testament to a pivotal moment when the human intellect began to stitch together the fragments of a discovered world, and in doing so, accurately dreamed of the pieces still missing. Waldseemüller's brilliant deduction gave shape to a new ocean, but the coastlines of the fabled Spice Islands remained a chaotic blur of rumor and desire. Into this turbulent world of royal espionage and pepper dreams sailed a Scottish hydrographer named June Rotz. In 1542, seeking favor and employment, he presented King Henry VIII of England with a breathtaking atlas of illuminated sea charts. It was a masterpiece of practical navigation and Renaissance art, a tool meant to guide England's nascent ambitions onto the world stage. Among its pages lies a map labeled Java Major, and it is here that the clear lines of navigation dissolve into a captivating mystery. The landmass Rotz drew is colossal, dwarfing any reasonable depiction of the island of Java. Its most striking feature is a long, deeply indented southern coastline, filled with distinct bays, peninsulas, and what appear to be river estuaries. This is not the compact, familiar shape of Southeast Asia. It looks for all the world like the eastern seaboard of an entirely different continent. This visual disconnect has fueled one of the most controversial theories in alternative cartography. Some researchers, most prominently historian Gavin Menzies, have proposed a startling interpretation. They argue that Rotz did not draw Java at all, but instead charted the eastern coast of Australia. The theory suggests the map preserves knowledge from the legendary treasure fleets of the Chinese admiral Zheng He, whose vast armadas are said to have explored the Indian and Pacific Oceans in the early 1400s. According to this view, Rotz, working for the intelligence-hungry English crown, had accessed Portuguese or Spanish copies of even older Chinese charts, faithfully reproducing a coastline no European would officially document for another 2 centuries. The mainstream academic response to this idea is one of firm and detailed skepticism. Scholars of Southeast Asian cartography point out that the label Java Major was a common, catch-all term used by early European mapmakers for a poorly understood region. They see Rotz's chart not as a misplaced Australia, but as a distorted amalgamation. It is likely a composite sketch, blending confused reports about the actual islands of Java and Sumatra with whispers of the Indochinese peninsula, all stretched and warped by the immense distance and the game of telephone played by rival spice traders. Each merchant and captain had an incentive to exaggerate dangers or conceal true locations, weaving deliberate misinformation into the very fabric of geographic knowledge. The true power of the Jean Rotz Atlas, therefore, lies not in proving a specific voyage, but in capturing that precise moment of cartographic chaos. It is a beautiful, frustrating snapshot of the world as Europe desperately wanted to understand it, a puzzle where every piece seemed to belong to a different box. Whether it holds a secret Chinese map or simply the scrambled hopes of English kings, it stands as a permanent testament to the fog that once shrouded the most valuable real estate on Earth, a fog so thick that an entire continent could hide in its depths for generations. This fog of profit and deception lifts momentarily in our next example, revealing a coastline so accurate it feels like a glimpse through time. The beautiful confusion of the Jean Rotz Atlas finds a more focused, yet equally enigmatic, echo in a map that may have been drawn for a French prince. Created sometime between 1530 and 1540, the document known as the Dauphin map presents a single, tantalizing piece of a much larger puzzle. It shows a fragment of the world with the islands of Southeast Asia clustered in the north, but jutting down from them, occupying the lower half of the parchment, is a vast, unnamed landmass. Its label is the key that unlocks centuries of speculation. It is called Java la Grande or Greater Java. This was a common enough placeholder name for the period, a cartographic convention for lands rumored to exist in the Great Southern Ocean. Yet the shape given to this Java la Grande is anything but conventional. Its northern coastline is not a smooth, speculative curve. Instead, it is a ragged, deeply indented line, a cartographer's attempt to capture a complex and unfamiliar shore. When you lay this coastline over a modern map, a quiet shock of recognition occurs. The upper section, with its distinctive bumps and inlets, aligns remarkably well with the western coast of Australia's Kimberley region. Farther down, the map shows a long, gradual sweep to the southeast, mirroring the immense, desolate arc of the Great Australian Bight. The correlation is stylized, certainly not a perfect satellite tracing, but the resemblance is too specific to dismiss as pure artistic accident. This map appears to show a land that, according to official European history, would not be encountered for another 60 to 80 years when Dutch ships began to accidentally crash into its western shores. So whose knowledge is captured here? The most straightforward answer points to Portugal. By the early 1500s, Portuguese caravels were pushing deep into the East Indies, the fabled Spice Islands. It is entirely plausible that one of these ships, blown far off course by the fierce trade winds of the Indian Ocean, sighted the mysterious western coast of Australia. For the Portuguese crown, such a discovery would have been a state secret of the highest order. Why reveal a new, empty coastline to your rivals when the true prize was the cloves and nutmeg of the Moluccas? Knowledge of this land would have been locked away in the Casa da India, Lisbon's central repository of maps and logs, guarded as fiercely as any treasure fleet. The Dauphin map, then, could represent a rare and precious leak. Perhaps a French agent acquired a copy of a secret Portuguese chart, or a talkative sailor's description was passed to a Parisian cartographer. This theory paints the map as a snapshot of espionage, a stolen glimpse of a continent that was being deliberately erased from the record. But there are other, even older, possibilities whispering in the margins. The map's coastline could also be a compilation of sightings from a much broader tapestry of maritime history. Arab traders had plied the Indian Ocean for centuries before the Portuguese arrived, and their how captains possessed a sophisticated understanding of winds and currents. Could some of them have ventured far enough south to glimpse this great land? Or does the map preserve, in a heavily distorted form, a final echo of the massive Chinese treasure fleets of the early 1400s, whose own exploration records were largely destroyed by a later imperial court? The Dauphin map does not choose between these origin stories. It simply sits there, a ghostly coastline in faded ink. It is a coastline without a context, a discovery without a discoverer. It captures that fleeting, fragile moment when a new piece of the world enters human awareness, not as a celebrated fact, but as a whispered rumor, a strange shape on a chart that has not yet earned its true name. This silent testimony of an encounter nobody officially made makes the confident, named continents on our next map all the more startling, for they depict a world that had not yet been fully circumnavigated. While European mapmakers argued over phantom islands and misplaced continents, a very different kind of knowledge was being assembled in Beijing. In the year 1602, the Jesuit scholar Matteo Reis unveiled his masterpiece, the complete map of the myriad countries of the world. This was not merely a map, it was a diplomatic and intellectual bridge. Reis, having spent decades in China, crafted it specifically for the Ming Dynasty court, aiming to earn their respect by demonstrating the breadth of Western learning. His approach, however, was not one of simple imposition. Reis was a synthesizer. He brought with him the latest European atlases, filled with the discoveries of Magellan and Mercator, but he also listened. He studied Chinese geographical texts and consulted with local scholars, absorbing a worldview that had evolved in parallel to Europe's for millennia. The map that resulted from this fusion is a breathtaking hybrid, a single document where two great streams of human understanding momentarily converged. Its depiction of the Americas is particularly striking. While many European maps of the same period were still wrestling with the shape of the New World, often showing California as a massive, separate island adrift in a vast sea, Reis's map gets a crucial detail right. It clearly depicts California as a peninsula, firmly attached to the North American mainland. This was a geographic fact that many European cartographers would stubbornly misrepresent for another 100 years. How did Reis, working from a distance of thousands of miles, achieve this clarity? The answer lies in his unique position at a cultural crossroads. He had access not only to European sources, but also to the archives and oral traditions of China. Scholars have long pondered whether some of the Chinese knowledge he incorporated contained faint echoes of the great treasure fleets of Admiral Zheng He, which a century earlier had sailed as far as Africa. While no surviving Chinese charts from those voyages show the Americas, the possibility remains that geographic data collected by those fleets, perhaps descriptions of distant lands from Arab or Indian traders they encountered, lingered in scholarly circles. Reis, I may have been the first and last person for centuries to hold both the eastern and western halves of the global puzzle in his hands at the same time. His map, therefore, symbolizes a road not taken. It represents a fleeting moment when a truly integrated global geography seemed possible, born from mutual exchange rather than conquest. That window would soon slam shut. Political shifts in China turned the empire inward, while European colonial expansion created a new, unbalanced dynamic of knowledge extraction. The insights Reis I captured on silk were forgotten or dismissed in the West, and the accurate shape of California would have to be painfully rediscovered by later explorers. His work stands as a quiet testament to what the world might have learned much earlier if curiosity had been allowed to flow freely in both directions. The quiet, integrated world of Matteo Reis's map gives way to a different kind of frontier, one defined not by oceans but by endless forests and frozen rivers. For centuries, European atlases labeled the vast, uncharted expanse of northern Asia with a single, ominous name, Tartaria. This was not a precise country, but a cartographic placeholder for everything unknown and mysterious east of the Ural Mountains, a land often populated on maps with illustrations of nomadic horsemen and mythical creatures. Yet, by the 16th and 17th centuries, something remarkable began to happen within those blank spaces. Maps by renowned cartographers like Gerardus Mercator started to fill in the void with surprising specificity. Where once there was only a label, now there appeared the snaking courses of great rivers and the distinct ovals of massive inland lakes. One of the most prominent features was a large, crescent-shaped body of water in the south-central region. To the European scholars drawing these maps, this was simply a geographic speculation, an attempt to give form to the rumors brought back by travelers. But we now know that this crescent corresponds almost perfectly with the shape and location of Lake Baikal, the deepest and oldest freshwater lake on Earth. Similarly, the sprawling river systems depicted draining northward align with the immense watersheds of the Lena and Yenisei rivers. The accuracy is too consistent to be guesswork. So how did this knowledge reach the drafting tables of Amsterdam or Antwerp decades, sometimes a century, before official Russian expeditions fully mapped Siberia? The answer lies in a slow, relentless tide of exploration that had nothing to do with kings or empires. This was the work of the Promyshleniki, Russian fur trappers and traders, driven by the insatiable European demand for sable and fox pelts. These rugged, unofficial pioneers moved eastward in small bands, following river networks deep into the continent. They traded with, learned from, and sometimes relied upon the indigenous Siberian peoples who had known this landscape for millennia. The knowledge was practical, born from survival and commerce, where the rivers narrowed into rapids, where the mountain passes lay, where the Great Lake shore could be crossed on winter ice. This information trickled back west through trade routes, eventually reaching European cartographers who were hungry for any detail to add to their increasingly detailed world pictures. The Tartaria maps, therefore, represent a crucial and often overlooked truth. While the celebrated age of discovery was unfolding on the high seas, a parallel, quieter age of discovery was happening over land. They remind us that the interior of a continent could be known intimately by local and indigenous networks long before it was ever claimed, named, or formally charted by a distant government. These maps are not prophecies but rather echoes. They are the translated whispers of trappers and the shared wisdom of native guides, carefully inked onto parchment thousands of miles away, creating a ghost image of a world that was already intimately understood by those who called it home. That intimate, overland knowledge of Siberia was a triumph of synthesis, of stitching together countless small journeys into a single coherent picture. In 1587, a Milanese nobleman named Urbano Monti attempted an even more audacious feat of synthesis on a truly monumental scale. He set out to create a single map that would contain the entire sum of the world's geographic knowledge, as it was understood in the late Renaissance. The result was not a standard chart but an enormous planisphere, a circular map over 9 feet in diameter, designed to be viewed as if from directly above the North Pole. This polar projection was itself a radical choice, forcing the viewer to reorient their entire perspective, to see the continents not arrayed left to right, but spiraling out from a central, frozen hub. Monti was not an explorer. He was a scholar, a correspondent, a man who collected reports and studied every chart he could acquire. His map is a tapestry woven from threads of hard-won sailors' logs, merchants' tales, ancient texts, and the bold theories of his contemporaries. In the vast southern reaches of his planisphere, following the scholarly fashion of his day, he drew a massive, speculative continent. This terra australis incognita was an act of educated imagination, filling the blank space that logic demanded must exist to balance the northern landmasses. Yet, when you examine the coastline he gave this theoretical land, a curious pattern emerges. The western portion of this invented shore is not a smooth, generic curve. It features distinct bays, capes, and inward bends. To modern eyes, these features bear a passing, stylized resemblance to the actual coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, particularly the prominent indentation of the Princess Martha Coast. This resemblance is almost certainly a coincidence, a spectacularly lucky guess, but it is a guess that forces us to appreciate Monti's methodology. He was not doodling. He was compiling. Every bump and inlet on his southern continent was likely inspired by some fragment of day, to a sailor's report of icebergs seen far to the south, a description of strange currents, or a line on an older, now lost chart that hinted at land beyond the stormy latitudes. Urbano Monti's planisphere represents the pinnacle of a certain kind of cartography. It is the ultimate expression of what a brilliant, well-connected mind of the late 16th century believed the world to be, based on the total available information. His map shows us the world not as it was, but as it was thought to be, a magnificent theory drawn in ink and paint. And in that grand theory, by accident or by some faint echo of truth, he may have sketched the ghost of a continent still waiting, frozen and silent, for its official discovery. This dance between scholarly theory and potential hidden truth finds a stunning counterpoint in a map that seems to bypass theory entirely, presenting a coastline with a clarity that feels less like speculation and more like a direct transcription. The grand theoretical sweep of Urbano Monti's planisphere stands in stark contrast to a map built for a single, urgent purpose: navigation. The King-Hamy Portolan chart, drawn by Portuguese masters around 1502 to 1504, is not a work of philosophical speculation. It is a tool, a practical sea chart crisscrossed with a dense web of room lines that guided pilots from harbor to harbor. Its value lies in its breathtaking immediacy. This chart captures the world map being rewritten in real time, with the ink barely dry on the reports from history's most consequential voyages. On the left side of the parchment, the coast of Brazil is drawn with a crisp, confident line. Pedro Alvarez Cabral had only officially made landfall there in 1500, yet within a year or two, that new coastline was already rendered with a precision that speaks of direct access to the captain's own logs. This alone reveals an astonishingly efficient pipeline from the deck of a caravel to the drafting table of a royal cartographer, but the true marvel lies on the opposite side of the map. The King-Hamy chart presents the Indian Ocean with a clarity that had been a European dream for centuries. The Indian subcontinent is correctly oriented, and the island of Sri Lanka, known then as Taprobane, is accurately placed off its southern tip. This was the precious fruit of Vasco da Gama's monumental voyage, which had successfully reached India by sea in 1498. The mapmaker, likely working in Lisbon, had somehow acquired and synthesized the navigational data from that journey at a speed that feels almost modern. How was this possible? The answer lies in the ruthless, secretive machinery of the Portuguese Casa da India. This was not an open academy of learning, but a tightly controlled state bureau where every scrap of geographic intelligence was a strategic asset. Pilots were debriefed, their rutters or logbooks confiscated and copied. This information was then distilled by a small, trusted circle of master cartographers into charts like this one, which were themselves considered state secrets, never to fall into rival hands. The King-Hamy chart, therefore, is less an artifact of Chinese letter knowledge and more a brilliant flashbulb, capturing the very instant a new world system snapped into focus. Yet, even this efficient machine did not operate in a vacuum. That precise outline of India was not drawn from pure Portuguese observation alone. It relied fundamentally on the deep, local knowledge of the Arab and Indian pilots who guided da Gama's ships the final leg of his journey. The chart is thus a layered document, a Portuguese frame over an Asian geographic reality. It shows us that the so-called Age of Discovery was often an age of guided tours, where European ambition was steered to its destination by the ancient wisdom of the very cultures it sought to dominate. This map is the sound of a door slamming open, and through it, we hear not just the Portuguese shouting in triumph, but the quiet, centuries-old voices of the pilots who showed them the way. The quiet voices of local pilots guiding Portuguese ships echo a far grander and far earlier tradition of maritime knowledge. In the early 15th century, decades before Portuguese caravels began their cautious journeys down the African coast, the largest wooden sailing fleet the world had ever seen was already crisscrossing the Indian Ocean. Commanded by the Ming Dynasty Admiral Zheng He, these treasure fleets were floating cities of diplomacy and power, visiting ports from Southeast Asia all the way to the eastern coast of Africa. They carried not conquistadors but scholars, diplomats, and goods for tribute exchange. And like any great voyage of state, they were meticulously documented. The official logs, star charts, and coastal maps produced by Zheng He's navigators represented the pinnacle of Chinese cartographic science, a systematic survey of half the world. Then it all vanished. A political shift in Beijing turned the empire inward. The treasure fleets were recalled, their great ships left to rot in their harbors, and a vast portion of their records was deliberately destroyed or lost. This act created one of history's greatest cartographic black holes, a void filled with whispers and tantalizing fragments. The most famous of these fragments is known as the Mao Kun map, a chart that appears in a military treatise from the late 16th century, long after the voyages had ended. It claims to be based on the original route maps from Zheng He's expeditions. What it shows is a detailed, strip map-style guide to the entire journey from China to Africa, with coastal profiles, sailing directions, and notes on landmarks that are remarkably accurate for the regions of Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. This alone confirms the sophistication of the knowledge that was gathered. The controversy, however, surrounds later copies and interpretations that emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries. Some of these later maps dramatically expand the scope, appearing to show not just the Indian Ocean world, but the outlines of the Americas, Australia, and even the frozen southern continent. Mainstream historians examine these world maps with deep skepticism, viewing them as retrospective compilations. They argue that later Chinese mapmakers, having learned of these lands from European sources in the Age of Discovery, simply integrated the new geography into a framework they attributed to their own legendary admiral, grafting a modern world onto an ancient hero's legacy. It is a form of patriotic cartography, reclaiming global awareness for a national icon. Yet, the core mystery persists in that original black hole of lost knowledge. If the Ming court had not deliberately ended the voyages and purged the records, what might those original charts have contained? The meticulous Mao Kun strip map proves that Zheng-He's navigators possessed a methodical, accurate system for surveying coastlines far superior to anything in contemporary Europe. Is it truly impossible that a storm-blown vessel from one of those fleets, or a deliberate exploratory mission we have no record of, ventured beyond the Cape of Good Hope and into the Atlantic currents, or south into the icy waters below Africa? We will never know for certain because the decision to turn inward severed the thread of that knowledge. The potential maps of Zheng-He's voyages, therefore, stand for something more profound than a specific route. They symbolize a parallel timeline, a road not taken. They represent a moment when a non-European power held the potential to map the entire connected world through a lens of trade and tribute, rather than conquest and colonization. Their loss is not just the loss of charts, but the loss of an entire perspective on discovery, leaving us to forever wonder about the full shape of a world that was almost understood and then deliberately forgotten. The deliberate forgetting of Zheng-He's world leaves us with a profound silence, a void where entire voyages might have vanished. But sometimes history speaks not through grand atlases or state secrets, but through a single, crumpled piece of paper, hastily tucked away and forgotten. Our final unexplained map is perhaps the most humble of all, a rough sketch discovered in the 19th century, used as mere binding material inside an old book in the Spanish town of Fuenterrabía. Dated to around 1500, this crude drawing is a stark contrast to the ornate masterpieces we have seen. It shows a scattering of islands and a stretch of coastline that scholars identify as the Caribbean and part of northern South America. There are no room lines, no decorative sea monsters, no elaborate cartouches. It has the raw, immediate feel of a field sketch, the kind a sailor might draw in his personal log to remember a newly sighted shore, or a pilot might draft to show his captain the layout of an anchorage. Its very crudeness is what makes it so compelling. This is not a synthesis of knowledge or a work of theory. It feels like a direct observation captured in the moment. The map's probable date is the source of its quiet power. Created around 1500, it places this first-hand glimpse of the New World at the very dawn of sustained European contact, concurrent with or even slightly before Columbus's later voyages. It does not claim to be first, nor does it seek to rename continents. It simply is a record of arrival. This unassuming sketch forces us to confront a thrilling and unsettling possibility. How many other sailors on how many other ships made similar drawings? How many personal logs filled with similar crude maps were lost to mildew in a ship's hold, burned for warmth, or simply thrown away when the voyage was done? The Fuenterrabía map represents the dark matter of exploration history. For every celebrated voyage that entered the official record, there may have been dozens of unrecorded journeys, chance landfalls by ships blown off course, and tentative contacts that never made it into the chronicles. These experiences did not vanish without a trace. They entered the stream of oral tradition, the shared yarns told in harbourside taverns from Lisbon to Bristol. A cartographer like Pizzigano, drawing his phantom islands, or the maker of the Dauphin map, sketching a mysterious southern coast, might have been listening to those very stories, translating sailors' memories into ink on parchment. This humble sketch, then, is a perfect and poignant place to end our journey through 20 unexplained maps. It brings us full circle from the grand mysteries of continents under ice to the simple, human act of seeing something new and trying to draw it. Each map we have explored, from the Piri Reis to this Fuenterrabía sketch, is a single point of light in a vast darkness. Together, they do not form a complete picture, but they trace the outline of a profound truth. The historical record we study today is not the full story of human discovery. It is merely the fragment that survived, the version that was written down, printed, and preserved by the powerful. These anomalous maps are the whispers from the edges of that record, the stubborn echoes of knowledge that existed outside the official narrative. They remind us that our past is not a closed book with a single, authoritative text, but a library with countless missing volumes. Some of those volumes may have held maps of astonishing accuracy, drawn by cultures whose accomplishments we have yet to fully appreciate. Others were likely just like the Fuenterrabia sketch, simple, honest attempts to make sense of a newly encountered world. Whether grand or humble, each one challenges us to listen more carefully to the quiet voices of the past, and to remain open to the possibility that the map of human history still has many blank spaces waiting to be filled. That humble sketch from Fuenterrabia and the 19 maps before it leave us not with a single answer but with a constellation of possibilities. The evidence is scattered across centuries, drawn in different hands and different languages, yet they all point toward a single, profound conclusion. Our accepted history of how the world was mapped is incomplete. To make sense of this, we must weave the scattered threads into a few overarching theories, each offering a different lens through which to view these cartographic ghosts. The first and perhaps most grounded explanation is one of secret knowledge and lost voyages. For every celebrated explorer like Columbus or Da Gama, how many unnamed fishermen, merchants, or privateers were blown off course by a storm and glimpsed an unknown shore? Their tales, told in dockside taverns, would have entered the realm of sailors' lore. More strategically, entire voyages of discovery may have been state secrets. A Portuguese caravel that accidentally sighted Australia in the 1520s would have had no incentive to publicize the find. That knowledge became a commodity, locked in the vaults of the Casa da Acutia, perhaps leaking out in fragments to rival cartographers through espionage or careless talk. This theory paints the age of discovery not as a linear progression, but as a shadowy competition where the full map was always known to someone, just never to everyone at once. A second, equally compelling theory credits the sheer intellectual power of the Renaissance mind. Scholars like Martin Waldseemüller or Philippe Buache were not merely copyists, they were brilliant synthesizers and logicians. By carefully comparing the growing body of sailors' reports, measuring distances on globes, and applying principles of symmetry and geometry, they could make stunningly accurate deductions. Waldseemüller's Pacific Ocean and Buache's bisected Antarctica could be triumphs of reason, not inherited secrets. This view suggests that human curiosity, armed with enough fragments of data and a powerful enough intellect, can sometimes reconstruct the truth long before direct observation confirms it. Then there is the deep well of antiquity. The Piri Reis map explicitly claims to be based on source charts from the time of Alexander the Great. Could these anomalous maps be preserving, in distorted form, geographic knowledge from the classical world? The ancient Greeks and Romans speculated about lands beyond their horizons, and their merchants traveled astonishing distances. Phoenician vessels may have circumnavigated Africa. Roman coins have been found in the Americas, though their journey there remains hotly debated. Perhaps the Library of Alexandria held maps compiled from a millennium of Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade, maps that were copied and recopied, their origins forgotten, until they resurfaced in Constantinople or Venice 1,000 years later. This connects directly to a fourth, and increasingly supported, theory, the Afro-Eurasian Knowledge Network. For centuries before European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope, a vibrant exchange of goods and ideas flowed along the Silk Road and across the Indian Ocean. Arab and Persian merchants, using advanced navigational tools like the astrolabe, had mapped the Indian Ocean and the coast of Africa with precision. Chinese treasure fleets under Admiral Zheng brought back detailed surveys from their diplomatic missions. This knowledge circulated among scholars and traders in the East, and it slowly seeped westward. The Korean Kangnido map is a perfect product of this network, showing an accurate shape of Africa decades before dyers rounded it, because the information came overland from Islamic sources, not from European ships. These maps remind us that the world was globally connected long before 1492, just not on European terms. Finally, we arrive at the most speculative possibilities, the ones that stretch the boundaries of conventional history. Could there have been a prehistoric global seafaring culture, a civilization lost to time and rising sea levels that mapped the world in an epoch when coastlines looked different? This idea, often tied to the myth of Atlantis or other lost civilizations, seeks to explain maps like the Piri Reis depiction of an ice-free Antarctica. It proposes a cataclysmic reset where advanced geographic knowledge survived only in cryptic fragments that later cultures inherited without understanding their source. While mainstream archaeology finds little evidence for such a globe-spanning culture, the theory persists because it addresses the most jarring anomalies, the ones that seem to require not just a lost voyage but a lost world. So which theory is correct? The most honest answer is probably all of them, and none of them exclusively. Each map is a unique artifact with its own story. The Dauphin maps Australia might be a Portuguese state secret. The Zeno map's strange lands are likely a blend of real Norse contact and family legend. The Buache map could be brilliant deduction, or it could rest on older charts we no longer possess. The true power of these 20 maps is not that they prove any one grand theory, but that they collectively demolish a simplistic one. They shatter the textbook narrative of discovery as a neat, European-led procession from ignorance to knowledge. Instead, they reveal history to be a messy, multidirectional, and deeply mysterious process. It is a process filled with dead ends, forgotten encounters, borrowed wisdom, and brilliant guesses. These maps are the quiet, persistent evidence that our past is not a single story written in stone, but a vast, interconnected library where many of the most fascinating volumes are still missing, waiting perhaps to be found or simply remembered. The true story of our world is not found in any single book, but in the silent language of these coastlines and compass roses. Each unexplained map is a ghost in the archive, a stubborn echo from a past we thought we understood. They speak not with the loud, clear voice of official history, but with the faint, persistent whisper of possibilities that were almost forgotten. What they reveal is far more valuable than a secret continent or a lost voyage. They reveal that our map of the past itself is incomplete, filled with blank spaces labeled not terra incognita, but memoria incognita, unknown memory. These cartographic puzzles do not hand us easy answers. Instead, they hand us a set of beautiful, frustrating questions. They ask us to reconsider the lonely genius of the explorer, reminding us that discovery is often a collective, chaotic process where knowledge slips between cultures, is guarded by kings, or is carried home by a storm-tossed sailor with a story no one fully believed. They challenge the very idea of a single age of discovery, showing us instead a tapestry of many ages, woven by Phoenician merchants, Arab scholars, Chinese admirals, and Norse adventurers long before certain famous names were ever etched onto globes. So where does this leave us after wandering through this gallery of cartographic ghosts? It leaves us not with a solved mystery, but with a renewed sense of humility and wonder. The greatest lesson these maps teach is that history is not a static monument, but a living conversation. It is a story we are still writing, one that is subject to revision with every fragment of parchment pulled from a book binding, every satellite scan of a glacial coastline, and every fresh look at an old, inscrutable line on a chart. Whether you interpret these documents as literal records of pre-Columbian contact, as brilliant works of theoretical deduction, or as symbolic art that accidentally brushed against truth, their power is undeniable. They stretch the boundaries of what we think is possible. They expand our imagination of human curiosity and resilience. They force us to acknowledge that the chronicles we rely upon are merely the fragments that survived, often curated by the powerful, while countless other stories dissolved into the sea spray or were filed away in a lost cabinet of curiosities. This is an invitation, then, to look at the world and its history with a more curious eye, delve into the stories behind these maps, question the tidy narratives. Follow the loose threads that professional historians and passionate amateurs alike are still tugging on today. The search for understanding is itself a form of exploration. And perhaps most importantly, share what you find. The comments below are a digital campfire, a place to gather and exchange theories, insights, and the sheer excitement of the unknown. If this voyage across parchment seas and into forgotten latitudes has captured your imagination, consider subscribing. Our channel is a compass for more journeys just like this one, to the edges of history, mystery, and the maps that forever lie just beyond them.